All right, folks, I'm going to start right where I left off in the last video. So I'm going to take my little ring over here and move it off to the edge. And I'm even going to take this and move it off the edge because I want to come back to that in a little bit, and specifically this almost like pattern that I've created with this dashed line. So prior to that, though, what I want to do is I want to show you a simple way to create like a pretty fun effect that has a dashed line. So again, I'm just going to make a line. It automatically fills because the dashed line, I've got it all set up. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of cut these things out of here. Cool. All right, so I've got just a traditional dash line with a bunch of, looks like dots or squares. Just so you're aware, right now this is a 10-point dash, so it's not quite a square because the weight is 12 points. But if I went ahead and I turned that weight into 10 points, now these are perfect squares. So keep that sort of thing in mind because, again, where can you use this? A dashed line, we automatically just think, oh yeah, we see a dotted line. That means we can cut something like a coupon. And that is 100% correct. But if you think about it, if you were going to create something like a map, then having a dashed line might be, simulate like where we're going to have something like a walking trail or something along those lines. So the ability to go ahead and modify those dashes and maybe make them equidistant apart from one another, and to make the gap and the box itself the same size both vertically and horizontally can give us a lot of information there too. So don't sell that short. So anyway, though, what I want to do is I want to play around with something that is really fun and it's really simple. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to take my dashes and make them 0. So there's nothing there. And we are going to go ahead and we're going to just kind of get this, what appears to be a straight line, right, with a 0-point dash. I'll put a gap in here like 10, right? And when I do that, I get a very, very, very faint, it almost looks like, I would call it like railroad tracks, something along those lines. Now, if I increase the weight of my railroad tracks, they get really tall, right? So now I have like what appears to somewhat of like, again, a walking path of sorts, right? This is where it gets kind of fun. So if I go ahead, let's make this a little smaller again, maybe like a 5-point stroke weight. Right now, my cap is considered a butt cap. If I created a projecting cap, hey, check it out. It makes those little squares again, except this time it doesn't matter what I have for my gap or my height. I can go ahead and I can just make them bigger. If I need to increase space in between them, I can just make the gap larger, but I can increase the size of them. Now, while I think that's fun and I think that's cool, I like using the rounded ones a little bit more because now I can create lines made out of dots. Now, this might seem like kind of silly because it's the same thing, right? It's just a dotted line, right? Except, actually now it's an actual dotted line instead of really a dashed line. But the difference here, what we can do with this is we can really use these as like ornamental design elements. Usually, circles play into that role really well, whereas sometimes squares and rectangles don't. If you want, you can also go ahead and you can increase the width of the dash itself, because right now it's 0, so I can make it a 2-point one, and now these are less circular and more oval, and I can go ahead and make it a 5-point one, and now it's got somewhat of like a capsule or a pill shape going on to it. I can make it even really long, like 10 points. See what that gives us. So every time I do it, I'm getting a different kind of quality. So again, this is all coming from the stroke palette, and this is coming from just putting a different cap on here. So again, the butt cap gives us that normal piece. The rounded cap gives us this. The projecting cap would give us this as well. So this gives us a lot of different options. And essentially what it can do is we can apply these strokes to different areas in our drawings. So I'm going to go ahead and put this circular one on here, except I'm going to make it a 0-point dash because I actually want real circles. And I'm going to just go ahead and I'm going to use any old tool here. I'll use the pencil tool, and I'm just going to go ahead and draw a little line and check it out. Now this can follow me, okay? Now, I bring your attention to this because, again, remember how I mentioned I can go ahead and I can, use these things almost like a pattern. So let's put a few different ideas together. And I know that in your previous classes, you must have talked about, at one point or another, the concept of width profiles. What a width profile is it gives our lines the appearance so they're not just one, uh, the width of the stroke the entire way through. So I'm just going to draw a little line out here, nice little curve. I'm going to turn my dash line off so we can see what this really looks like. So this is what we call, a curved line, a Bezier curve, right? And so if I click on this, and I can do this also with a pencil or a pen tool or the curvature tool. I can do this with shapes. I can do this with lots of things. I just can't do it with the paintbrush tool. It doesn't allow for that. But when I go ahead and I go into my stroke palette or I go into my control palette, I can go ahead and I can modify the width of the stroke of this outline. And then I can also change what we call the profile. And it's here at the bottom of the stroke palette, or it's right here next to it. So if I click on this, these are what we call variable width profiles. And they have 6 of them that are developed already here in the software. And to just get a sense of what they look like a little bit, let's go ahead and let's just copy a handful. So here we are. Here are 7 width profiles, and just going to make them a tad smaller so that way they fit on the white area here of our workspace, our artboard. But we're going to be able to see what they all look like, hopefully without distractions. Let's move our little kind of like tiger ring, that's what I'm calling that now, the tiger ring, off to the side even more, so then that way we don't really see it at all. So check this out. So by default, this is what this looks like, uniform. All right, so let's take a look at this one. We're going to go here to the width profile, and we're going to click width profile 1. All right, so what we have with that is this little thing. It looks like it's small on the edge, fat in the middle, small on the other edge, and it gives us this tapered look. Okay, and then if we go ahead and we come over here and we click on this width profile, it goes thin to thin in the middle, to thick again, to thin. All right, and we can go ahead and we can use this one that almost looks like a piece of kind of charcoal or something like that. And then width profile 4 is going to give us a taper, but only to one side, and then we have a nice kind of hard edge on this side. Width profile 5 is going to somewhat give us a similar thing, except it's a little softer here on the bigger edge. And then last but not least, width profile 6 will give us this kind of like somewhat half moon kind of shape. So as you can see, were 7 identical lines a few minutes ago, and now they all have different appearances to them. So the cool thing that we can do here when we're dealing with things like dashed lines and stuff is we can be working with something like this, a line that's going to taper. Okay, so it's going to get thick, it's going to get thin, and so I'm going to take this line, so I'll move these off to the side, and get them out of our way. And I'm going to take this one, and I'm just going to make it a little bit larger so we can see it a little bit better. Okay. Now notice when I made it a little bit larger, the stroke did not change. So stroke weight's going to stay the same no matter how big or small we make something, right? So the only way it would change is if I went ahead and I purposely transformed it to change when I did a transformation. But in this case, I did not have that. And I did not have that on purpose because I want to create that dashed line, and I want to create that circular dashed line, and I want that dashed line to just be the dots, okay? So I want them to be a 0 dash and a 10-point gap. That's not quite big enough, that gap. So let's put in like a 30-point gap and see what we have. That's a little bit more our style. Now, again, take a look at this. I'm going to copy this object, and I'm going to take the width profile off and put it to uniform. So this is what that same width profile looked like, but with dots, right? Or excuse me, the same stroke looked like, but with dots, with a uniform width profile. And here it is with that tapered one, right? So you can see how you can go ahead and utilize these things while we are working. And here's the really fun part, okay? You, by all means, can utilize a profile like this, but at the same time, we can go ahead and create our own profiles using what we call the width tool in Illustrator. So we select our object and we're going to come over to our tool palette, and there's this tool right here. It's the width tool. You can access it by hitting Shift plus W. And the way the width tool works is we can roll up and down this little path, and we get this little white ball that's kind of showing up right along the path. So basically, essentially what it is it allows us to plop an anchor point wherever we want. And what I can do is I can click and I can pull this so I can make it a really, really, really kind of big kind of structure. And if I feel like it also, I can click and I can pull it back. So it's not there for good, if you would, right? We have options. I can also go ahead and I can double click on them and I can have options pop up here, and I can either link them together or unlink them. So what that means is I can link it together so I can grow this thing in such a way where it's going to feel like it's happening equally, or I can unlink them so that I'm really only growing one side or growing, shrinking one side and growing the other. So I have that opportunity, so I can do it on the top or on the bottom, okay, of this, or on either side, depending on if this is a vertical line. I'm going to go ahead and cancel that for 1 second because I'm going to come back here with the profile, or excuse me, with the width tool, and I'm going to hold down the Option key this time, or Alt on a PC, and essentially I can get that one-sided part, and it allows me to go ahead and do that in such a way where I can grow just one side. So what does this have to do with that stroke tool I just had going on and the dashed line? So let's put that back on for a second, and let's take our width tool, and we can start out with something like this cool taper, which we know has got a pretty kind of a cool effect. But we can take the width tool, and even though it's not an actual line, it is a line, right? It's an outline. So I can come over here and I can grab one of these things and I can pull, and check it out. I can go ahead and I can grow these things. So that's a pretty powerful tool right here, right? That we can go ahead and do this. And again, I can just select this and I can see what it looks like. So I can adjust this and see if I really kind of like what I'm doing. And I was only growing one side of it, and here I can push and grow the other side. Now, I think what ends up happening in these circumstances, more so than less, is that the circles start to like really kind of bunch up on one another, and that's a thing. So that's just something where you're going to have to modify your gaps a little bit. But this allows you to go ahead and essentially grow these things, and not do it in such a way where you would have to go ahead and draw a circle and then draw another circle and draw another circle. So it allows us to follow a path in a really kind of good way. We played around with it a little bit, like doing this with our blend tool a little bit too. But remember, this is going to be a regular old stroke, so we can color any color that we want, and we can even throw gradients across it. So that's pretty cool. So go ahead and play around with that a little bit, and I think that you'll be amazed of all these little things, these almost like Illustrator hacks that have been hiding inside palettes that you thought you knew like the back of your hand, for a very long time. So enjoy and have fun with that.